Good day, grade 11s. I am Ms. Zulu, your business studies tutor, and today we will be looking at the practice and application questions under the topic that says acquiring funding if needed. Now let's look at our first practice question. Read the scenario below and answer the questions that follow. Queendom Boutique QB. Busi, the owner of Queendom Boutique, invested her own capital into the business to encourage commitment. QB also arranged with Promise Bank to withdraw more money than they had deposited in their bank account. Identify two sources of funding used by QB. Motivate your answer by quoting from the scenario above. Use the table below as a guide. Okay, now let's go back to our scenario, because now we know the question that it says we need to identify the sources of funding and we need to quote from the scenario. So one thing I need to remind you is that when we quote, we need to take the sentence from the beginning up until the end and not only choose what we feel is relevant for the answer. So let's go back to the scenario. Busi, the owner of Queendom Boutique, invested her own capital into the business to encourage commitment. So basically this sentence that starts from Busi and ends where there's a full stop and commitment, it tells us that Busi invested her own money into the business. So this sentence alone tells us that Busi provided her own capital. So the source of funding here would be own capital. And as you have seen that, I have underlined, or I have actually quoted from the beginning of the sentence up until the end of the sentence. Now let's continue reading our scenario. QB also arranged with Promise Bank to withdraw more money than they had deposited in their bank account. So this statement that says withdraw more money than they had deposited, it shows us that Busi went to the bank and made arrangements. So obviously with those arrangements being made, this statement qualifies to be a bank overdraft because she arranged with Promise Bank. So you would take the sentence from the beginning up until the end when you quote. So it would be a bank overdraft with that sentence that says QB also arranged with Promise Bank to withdraw more money than they had deposited in their bank account. Now let's move on to the second question. It says discuss other sources of funding that QB can consider. So you need to bear in mind when you read the question, take into account that it said other sources, meaning the ones that we have mentioned in question 1, which is own capital, bank overdraft, we must not mention them, but mention the other sources of funding that were not mentioned. So we would have our leasing and hire purchase. Businesses can lease certain assets, such as equipment and technology, which is owned by the other party. So another source of funding would be not to buy, because buying can be expensive at times, but lease equipment such as machinery, such as our technology from other parties, whereby we will rent out the assets that we have actually leased by paying a monthly fee or a yearly fee that will be agreed upon by the owner of the asset as well as the business. So obviously, if you borrow the assets, they won't belong to you, but you will be paying less for those particular equipments or assets. Another source of funding that we have is angel funding. Sometimes a wealthy entrepreneur offer financial help in exchange for a share in the business. So another source of funding that we can look into is angel funding, whereby we don't go to the bank, but instead we find a wealthy entrepreneur who then invest in our business in exchange for having a share in a business. So in that way, as a business, we obtain capital, the investor gets a share in a business. We are not owing anyone anything, but instead we exchange a share with money that is going to be invested, which is going to be the capital that is going to assist us as a business. Another source of funding that QB can consider is issuing of shares. New companies can issue shares to obtain capital. So obviously, if your company is new and if it is a public company, obviously, you can offer shares in order for you to raise the capital that you need. That's another source of funding. Instead of going to the bank, instead of angel funding, instead of those higher lease and hire purchases, you can opt for issuing of shares. You sell shares to the public, they give you money in exchange for a share, and you are getting the capital that you need in a business. Or you can look into bank loans. Businesses may apply to borrow money from the bank. So another source of funding, we can go to banks and borrow money. But we also need to consider the fact that loans, you have to repay them with an interest that will be charged on them. So these are the sources of funding that QB can consider rather than the ones that she considered, which is overdraft as well as own capital. So let us just go for a quick break and we will be back.